In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to get started converting your InfoPath forms into StratusForms. And actually the technique we'll be using, you could use to start converting your InfoPath forms into any HTML-based form solution. A couple of caveats though, you do have to be comfortable with HTML. If you have things like dynamic views and business logic, you're going to have to write some JavaScript. So this example that I'm showing you guys is not the silver bullet for every single InfoPath form you have. It's going to show you how you can convert the simple forms easily, and it's also going to give you the tools you need to start converting some of your more complicated forms from InfoPath into StratusForms. So with that being said, with my butt covered, let's go ahead and just jump in, and we're going to do something that I never thought I would hear myself saying, but let's open up InfoPath. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up InfoPath, and we are going to design a very simple form, just so you guys can see this entire process. I'm not making anything up. So we've opened up InfoPath. I'm going to design a form, and I'm going to attach to a form in my site over here. Let me just go there and copy and paste the URL so it'll be faster. I should point out while it's doing this that something I did find that I haven't seen since I started, haven't run into since I last used InfoPath, is that InfoPath does not work with multi-factor authentication. So that's a limitation you're going to have to take into account with SharePoint Online. Is another reason maybe using InfoPath is going to become problematic for you if you haven't yet moved into SharePoint Online and you're going to use multi-factor auth. So I want to create a form for one of my existing lists, and in my list I have this list in SharePoint called football players, and it's just got some simple information to store content about a football player. So InfoPath is going to generate this form for us. Take just a second. And here we can see our basic InfoPath form, nothing fancy whatsoever. And now you can go through and do everything you want to do with InfoPath. Let's go ahead and delete some of these fields that maybe we don't want to use. I want to make this a simple tutorial for you. I don't want to have a ton of fields. So we've got just a few fields here: the title of the name of the player, their position, their number, and their position. We can do things like change the layout, and we can we can insert a row below, so we'll insert another row here. And let's add another field. And this is a field that we're adding that's not part of the actual SharePoint list. So it's just some other field with something that you can do with InfoPath. And let's go ahead and add that. So we've now created a field that is not part of the SharePoint list. Okay. Again, go in here and you can add your styling, your coloring. Gosh, it's been so long since I've used InfoPath. I don't really. So we just add a little coloring here. Okay. So our really ugly, simple InfoPath form. Again, this could be a complicated form, whatever, but this is just getting started. So we're going to save this form. I am just going to save it to my desktop, and we'll call it football. Okay, I'm not going to publish this form. I just wanted to create a form for you guys. So the simple form's created. I'm now going to exit InfoPath. I'm not going to publish this file. And here's our file. We can see it's called football.xsn. And this is our InfoPath form. So what you can do now is you can actually rename your InfoPath form and get rid of that XSN extension and rename it to CAB for a CAB file, because an InfoPath form is actually a CAB file made up of multiple files. So after you do that rename, you can double click on the CAB file and you can actually see all of the files that make up that InfoPath form. And the file that we care about is going to be this view1.xsl. This file actually contains the HTML for our InfoPath form. So we can use this same HTML to convert our InfoPath form to something else, and it's going to look exactly the same as it did before. Now, if you've got multiple views and other information, you may see multiple XSL files here for your views, in which case you would have to take that into account when you're doing your conversion. Maybe write some additional JavaScript to switch between views. But for our simple example, we just have this one view1.xsl. So I'm going to extract this one file out of the CAB file just by dragging and dropping it on my desktop. And now I'm going to open up this file with Visual Studio Code so we can take a look at what's in this file. So as you can see, this file, it has some XML. It's technically an XSL file, so it's got some XML information, but you can also see it's the HTML for the file itself. So I'm going to go through here and I'm just going to strip out some of this XSL stuff and this XML stuff. I'm going to just go down here to the head element, and then I'm going to go to the end of the file, and I'm going to get rid of the this other XSL. So we got rid of those tags. I don't want to, and there's also things you could do in here to clean up the rest of this form. But again, I'm just showing you guys how to get started with that conversion process. So I took that XSL file, I removed the top and bottom portions of that of the XML layout. The next thing I'm going to do now is I have created a form builder, an assistant tool on the StratusForms website. So if you go to StratusForms.com and you click on the link for form builder, it's going to take you for a tool that's going to help you convert your InfoPath forms. So what I can do now is I can go back into Visual Studio Code. I can just do a copy and paste. I'm going to copy this XML, this HTML, and I'm going to paste it here into this field in the StratusForms InfoPath Conversion Assistant. And what I can do now is I can click on this little greater than less than sign in the top left hand corner, and it's going to show me an HTML rendering of that form. And you can see it's the same styling as we had in InfoPath, that same coloring. So it's going to maintain that. And then we can go back to the source view so that we can now edit that HTML. So to help you replace these InfoPath fields that aren't being rendered properly, we're going to go in there and we're going to replace those InfoPath fields with StratusForms fields. And that's how this is going to work with StratusForms. So to help you do that, I even created a button here that's going to help you find your InfoPath fields. So when you click on this button, it's going to take you to the place in the HTML for where that InfoPath field is. So you can see here is the title field from the InfoPath form. So what we can do now is come to this field creator over here, and we can specify the field name, which is title, and the internal field name. This is the actual internal field name of the SharePoint list item, which is also title in this instance. And then we can say choose what type of field it is. So we have a lot of different fields to choose from. These are just single line of text fields, so I'm just going to insert this field, and you can see it inserts the HTML that we need for StratusForms for this title field. So now I can delete that field and find the next field, which is a field called number. So I'll come in here, we'll do number, and this is also a single line of text field. We'll insert this field. So you would just go through this process for all your fields to replace the InfoPath field with the StratusForm field. So you do have to be comfortable with some HTML in here, but it's not too painful. I'll try to make it as easy as possible to get started. So you also have the position field. Let's go ahead and put these last couple in here. So this would be position, and let me go ahead and delete that. And our last field here was our field we called My Field, which is actually not part of the SharePoint list. So what we want to do is we want to give that one a field name called My Field, but it doesn't have an internal field name because it's not a SharePoint list field. So we simply do not specify an internal field name. And then we insert that field. Okay, now if we switch back over to the HTML view, we can see that we have text boxes for these fields. The last thing we need to do to this form, however, is we want to actually add a save button so that a user can go and make changes and edit and save items to the form. So we've got the form here, but we don't have any sort of save button. So I'm going to move my cursor down to the bottom of my form or wherever you want the save button to be. And if you look at the list of fields, you have two options. One for the SPFX save button and one for a save button if you're not using the SharePoint Framework web part. So in this first example, we're using the SharePoint Framework. So I'm just going to choose the SharePoint Framework save button and insert that field. And make sure you get rid of the field name because it doesn't need a field name. And here's our save button that we need. So again, if we pop back over to the preview, we can see that there's a submit button for the form now. And then here's our source code for that form. Okay, so this form is ready now to be a form in SharePoint as a StratusForms form. And that's going to be as quick and easy as jumping over here to your SharePoint site. Here you can see we have that list called football players with a couple of entries in it. And if I go to the home page for this site, or any modern page or any classic page this will work with if you're using the SharePoint Framework web part, if I edit this page and I insert a web part, we scroll down, we will see the StratusForms web part. From here, we need to edit the properties of this web part, and one of the things it's asking for is what is the list name, and that name of that list was football players. And now it's asking for the form HTML. So what we can do is we can go over to this form builder tool and just copy and paste all the HTML as is right into this HTML box and use that. Now you see we have some other fields that once you get more advanced in StratusForms, you can do things like add business logic. So this is where you would add your script for calling functions to do business logic and do checking and switch between views. If you want to do something after the page has been saved and submitted, like take the user to someplace else in the site, you would put that JavaScript here in the submit script. So what do you want it to be done after the form submitted? You can do things like enable some encryption. There's there's other things you can do as you get more advanced, but for the point of this lesson, it's taking that InfoPath form, converting those fields to StratusForms fields, and publishing it to SharePoint. So now that we've specified the list name and the form HTML, we can apply that. You can see that there's our form right there, the way it looked in InfoPath, and republish the page. So now we have that InfoPath form converted to a StratusForms form on our modern page in SharePoint, and we can fill it out. So if we want to put in another player, we can put in, let's put in Rob Windsor, and he's number 1, right? His position is going to be center, and for this custom field, we'll just say he's a nice guy for a Canadian. And now I'm going to save it. So I didn't do it. It's not doing anything after I saved it because I didn't have any JavaScript in that submit function. I could have told it to say, hey, thank you for your submission, or I could have navigated them to a different page. But now if we go back and look at that football player list, you can see here is the entry for Rob Windsor. And here is his name, here is his position, here is his number. And you'll notice there's not a my field in this SharePoint list. But if we go back to that home page and we put in the query string variable so it knows which field to add, the Rob Windsor field was an ID of 5, we can see it saved that my field. It saved in all the information it read from that list item. So now here's our form. And so now we can do things like repeating content and all the cool things you can do with InfoPath you can now do in a modern page in SharePoint. Okay, so again, this was deploying it using the SharePoint Framework web part. So it was very simple. All we had to do was take the HTML, paste it in there, and we were done. Now, if you're in SharePoint 2013, or if you're in SharePoint 2016 that doesn't have the SharePoint Framework web part, or maybe you just don't have access to the Framework web part and you want to use a content editor web part, we can deploy this solution with a content editor web part as well. There's just a couple more steps involved. So that's what I'm going to do next, is I'm going to take the same solution and I'm going to deploy it to a classic page using a content editor web part. So now to convert this form to a StratusForms form that doesn't use the SharePoint Framework web part, like I said, we've just got a couple additional steps we have to do. So I've reloaded the StratusForms website and I'm going to click on the form builder tool again. Something important I want to point out is that there is this div here called SF form, and the non-SharePoint Framework web part needs to know what element, what div is your entire form contained in. So this div we didn't use this div for our other form. It doesn't exist, but we do need it if we're not using the StratusForms SharePoint Framework web part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into this page. I'm going to keep this div here, right? I'm not going to change this div. And I'm going to copy and paste the HTML that we used in our SharePoint Framework web part. And I'm just going to paste that in between this div. Okay? So that's something we have to make sure that we do. The other thing we need to do is get rid of the SharePoint Framework Save button, and we want to insert the non-SharePoint Framework Save button. So let's insert that field here. Now if we jump back over to the HTML, the form is going to look the same, but it's now contained within that div, and we have a different Save button. Okay? The other thing that we need to do is that we have to actually tell the form builder the name of the list here, because before we set it as the property in the web part, here we're going to do it for the form builder. So that was called football players, and we have a button that says show JavaScript. And what it's going to do now is it's going to show you all the JavaScript that you have to copy and paste, which isn't a lot. It's going to include some files. It's going to have an initialization function and a submit function. And this is the JavaScript needed to create an entry, update an entry, and display an entry. And all this JavaScript is already part of the SharePoint Framework web part. That's why we don't have to worry about it. So what we can do now is we can go over to our SharePoint site. And before you do that, you want to go to the GitHub site for StratusForms, which is github.com/imrackley/StratusForms. And from there, you want to make sure you download the StratusForms 1.55.js file and the SP Services 1.55.js file, and upload those files to the site assets directory of your SharePoint site that you're going to be having your form, or wherever you store your scripts, and then change the references appropriately. So those are the main files that StratusForms needs. And again, you don't have to do this step for the SharePoint framework because those files are part of the framework solution. So I've uploaded the files I need to my site assets library. I also have another file that I've created called StratusForms.js. This is just an empty file that I'm going to be using for my form. So this empty file in my site assets library, I'm going to edit this file. And to this empty file, I am going to add, I'm just going to copy and paste all of this JavaScript and just paste it in here. And then I'm going to go to the HTML. I'm going to copy and paste that into the file. Okay, so we had to actually have both the JavaScript and the HTML when we're using the non-SharePoint Framework web part. So I've added those two files from the form builder to this file in the site assets library. I'm now going to save this, and now I can go into my site contents, go into my site pages, and I can from here add a web part page. So if you're in your SharePoint 2013 environment, this is what you'll be doing. Your 2016 on-prem environment that doesn't have the SharePoint framework. And we're going to call this StratusForms. Actually, we'll call it football player because that's what it's for. We'll create that. And now I can add a web part to this page. In this instance, it's going to be a media and content editor web part. And now I'm going to edit this web part, and we're going to point it to that StratusForms file that we created in our site assets library. And that was in site assets /StratusForms.js, and we'll apply that. And here is our form. So I can go ahead and stop editing that form. If I want to now, I can actually load one of those other entries. Remember that entry we created for Rob Windsor that had an ID of 5? I can now go ahead and just load that form by doing a form ID equals 5. there's it loaded our form. And I can go ahead and update this form. Let's change his number from 1 to 10. Let's submit the form. And now it says the save was successful. This because this also has some JavaScript for what it's going to do when the form saves. Page reloads. His number is 10. If we go to the football players list, we can see Rob's entry. He is now number 10. So it still works with that same entry that we had on our modern page as well. So we can now use this in the SharePoint Framework web part, or we can use it with the Content Editor web part in our different environments. So there you have it. So this is, again, steps to help you get started with that conversion process. Again, if you have multiple views, you have dynamic views, you're going to have to write some JavaScript to go in there and dynamically show and hide things and to do some of your business logic. So again, this isn't a silver bullet. This is to fix all of your InfoPath woes, but it should give you the pieces to get started down that conversion process. And you guys need to do something to start getting off of InfoPath. It's, you know, I can't say so many times, it is going out of support. It is dying. So please figure out your form strategy. Hopefully this helps you guys get there. I'm going to have links to the blog post that corresponds to this in the description, as well as a link to the StratusForms SharePoint Framework web part. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a SharePoint Framework web part that works as a Teams application so that you can do your StratusForms as a tab in Teams as well. So something else to look forward to. I hope this helps. And if not, I offer a money back guarantee. So there you go. Thanks for your time. Bye.